Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best of the best to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is Henrik van der Poel, the CEO of Perdoo. Henrik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thanks for the invite. It's great being here.
We have been trying to make this for a very long time.
Yes,
and we'll
right.
also do this episode for the first time in the Dutch way, because we just have kind of 20-25 minutes, the both of us, to do the podcast, and we've been crazy finding agendas. So let's see if we can do it in such a short amount of time. So it will be fun also for our listeners. So who is Henrik?
I'm Henrik. I'm Dutch. Moved to Berlin in 2013, and that's where I started the company. The company is called Perdoo. It's a strategy execution and a strategy execution system built on OKR. Before starting Perdoo, I worked as a management consultant, where I was responsible for implementing strategic projects. And there I learned firsthand that designing a strategy is very, very much fun work, but that's also the easy part. It gets really tricky when you want to successfully implement and execute it, which is one of the reasons that we started Perdoo. And at the same time when we started Perdoo, OKR was still in the very early days, but getting some traction, which is why we've built on the system on OKR, of course, which nowadays has gained a lot of popularity.
Absolutely. Love it. And we always discuss on the show 3 critical ingredients to scale that I think that you have already introduced the majority of them. Number 1, radical focus. Number 2, world-class leadership. And number 3, the execution operating system. So radical focus, we see, and I think that's my main job as a leader working with CEOs and leadership teams, is to helping them to drive radical focus. Because especially if you are in a venture-backed business, you need to double, triple revenues every single year. You need to work in the short, in the mid, and long term. So it's an exercise of subtraction, of killing complexity, of simplification, of radical focus. And OKRs help me a lot on that process. So what are some of your lessons driving radical focus to leadership teams and CEOs with the OKR framework and with your company?
I think one big, any startup, any scale up is always lacking resources. Any company is lacking resources, really, which is why you need a strategy in the first place. Even if you raise tons of money, it's still hard to quickly find all the people that you need to turn it into reality. And if you, taking these constrained resources as a starting point, you need to make it a very conscious process to decide how you're going to allocate those resources. And even if you hire people, right, like you need to make sure that you first have it clear what your organization's strategy is, like which customers are you targeting.
Exactly.
And then you can start hiring the right people that would help you realize that strategy. So I think, it's critical that you first start with the strategy of your business and really have a good understanding of what kind of company you want to build, how the company will be different from the competition. And once you have that in place, I think the next step will be to implement OKRs, to start working with OKRs, because the big benefit that OKRs bring to a company is that you make it an ongoing process to regularly look up, see what's happening around you, evaluate what's going on, what parts of your strategy were working out, which parts were not working out, and then decide what you want to be focusing on next. And that enables you as a startup, as a scale up, to decide where you want to go next, instead of constantly responding, putting out fires everywhere, and it makes yourself become proactive instead of reactive, really.
Absolutely, and you need that if you want to play to win the game instead of playing to not lose the game, which that's sometimes that reactive approach is like, right. So I don't want to forget anything apart from I have a strategy to win the game, and I'm fully focused on executing that strategy, right?
Yeah, and first you need to decide which game you want to play, right? You may have competitors.
Great one.
There's this book from Roger Martin that I really like. I think it's called "It's Playing to Win." I believe is the title.
Exactly.
And he always starts with the playing field, that you need to define your own playing field, because you may have like alternative solutions that are in the same space as you, but it doesn't automatically mean that you are competing with them if you are going after completely different clients or if you take a certain approach with your solution.
Absolutely. Love it. Let's introduce, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, well, I think the other thing about focus, I mean, it doesn't come from me, and I think there's lots of people out there saying it, but I think this can't be repeated often enough, is that focus is so much more about deciding what not to do than it is about what deciding to do. And I mean, nowadays we work with hundreds, even thousands of customers are using our software, and I don't think I've seen any client yet that had too little OKRs, right? Everybody has too many OKRs, too many things they're focusing on. And when you do that, you're really avoiding the hard question, which is like, okay, but what really is a priority? So yeah, I think that's the hardest thing with OKRs is deciding which ones you're not picking up, because it's usually always clear which ones you want to pick up, which is always too many.
Absolutely. I like to say first is when we are deciding on the objectives or the key results that best assess the objectives, it's say first, it's a result. It's not an initiative. Second, it's a key result. Is it key? Do we really need to track this? And so that's that part, right? Is it key? Because we have a lot of results that we want to achieve, but what are the key results?
And that's a whole separate topic, of course. The difference between outcomes and outputs. Like we take a pragmatic approach there. So we always say that you need to reflect in your OKRs what matters most to you. Yeah. And if a key result is, if for you an important key result is that you complete a certain project or that you do a certain thing, if that for you is a really good measurement of success for the objective, then fine. Put that as your key result. But very often, very often you'll see that what matters most for businesses are the actual results. So what truly matters for a business most of the time is not so much what will we be doing, but what are the results that are so important for us to accomplish in order to get where we want to be.
Absolutely. Let's bring number 2, which is the world-class leadership. And I love that one because first, of course, we set up the foundation, right? We need to be very clear of what we want to achieve as a leadership team and as a team, as one team, the overall team of the company, right? And that's the first layer of the OKRs. But then it comes some complexity, which is the second layer. What the hell do we want to go in marketing, in product, in engineering, in sales, in customer success, in people, in finance? And I would say that even a third layer comes from when we have the right OKRs at the functional layer supporting the company layer, but with cross-functional alignment. And that's what I love about the OKR workshops. It's really that discussion about getting into the OKRs, even of the functions together. And I think one of the mistakes that also leverage the gap of communication or the silos is that each of them are doing their functional OKRs or the second layer OKRs alone and not as a team, as a company. So I'm not sure if you face that in the cascading process. And that's my point on world-class leadership that needs to bring the team together and to have just one team and culture and make it part of the culture.
Yeah. Yes, but so the leadership. I mean, leadership. The word has it in it, right? And there's tons of great quotes about this topic out there on the internet. But leadership is about leading an organization, whereas management is more about controlling an organization. I think. So a very important thing that the leadership team, that a good world-class leadership team needs to provide is direction for the organization. So start with communicating what's the ultimate goal of your business, like what's the mission and vision. It's very important that everyone in your organization is aware of that. Where you're 10 people, that's easy because you talk about this all the time, but it gets a lot harder once you get to 100 or get to 1,000 people, of course. Then it's very important that everybody understands what is the strategy of the organization so that they can make sure that they move within the strategic boundaries of the business. And then lastly, what I often recommend leadership teams to do is to then also define a particular focus for each year. So at Perdoo, I've just done this with my co-founder at the beginning of this year, where we've identified 4 bigger themes for the company for 2021 that we then set up as annual company objectives. We don't create key results for those because it's really about a higher level direction, and we don't think that we need to narrow it down that much, or that they need to be measurable, because we measure progress, or we measure success for these company objectives by looking at the overall progress of the team objectives that are aligned with it. So yeah, I think that's about what I find important about leadership and providing direction to the organization. And then I think the second thing that you mentioned was more about cascade. How do you get the company to work together? Yeah. What we usually recommend organizations, and what we do ourselves as well, is that me and my co-founder Jonathan, we identify the bigger themes for this year, but then we ask everyone underneath that. We ask all the different teams to come up with their own objectives that are inspired with those. And sometimes they identified other objectives that they believe are important to work on that have nothing to do with the 4 or 5 big themes that we identified are important for this year. And that's perfectly fine. Like I would never treat it as narrow as that whatever you do, it must be aligned with the company objectives. But what you want to do is you want to have a healthy discussion about what did the team believe is important? Why is that not matching what we believe is important for the business overall for this year? And then it could still end up that they have an objective that is helping them improve one of the KPIs that they are responsible for example, instead of it supporting one of the annual company objectives that we have identified. And then within those teams, the discussions that we want to foster is not so much that you go around the team and ask each individual, like, hey, Mike, what should your OKR be for this quarter? And hey, Mark, what should your OKR be? But then instead you sit together with the team and you'd say, okay, here's the performance of our team. Here's how our KPIs have been performing throughout the past quarter. This is what the strategy of the organization is. This is what the leadership team has identified are the priorities for this year. When you take all that context into account, that you then have a discussion amongst you to say, like, what do we believe is it what we should be focusing on in the next quarter? How do we believe we can add most value and make the most impact on the business? And then it could be that you end up with one objective, could be that you end up with 4 objectives. But I think it's most important that you identify the right objectives to focus on. And then you can decide, okay, who wants to lead this objective and who wants to lead that objective? And what I then usually see is that at that time, it's not entirely clear yet who you will need to achieve that objective. But a group of people will naturally start forming itself around that objective. And that's then through the initiatives, through all the projects and tasks that need to be accomplished, that need to be completed in order for you to accomplish that objective. And if all those people contributing to that objective come from within one team, I mean, that could be perfectly fine. And then you can call it a functional objective. For me, that doesn't matter that much. Most of the time, you do need like someone from the engineering team to help you achieve your own marketing objective. And then someone in the sales team needs a little bit of help from someone from customer success to help achieve their own objective or for help to achieve their sales objective. So I think most of the objectives are, it is clearly a sales objective, and something can clearly be a marketing objective, but really to achieve one of those objectives, most of the times you need people from across different functions in order to achieve that.
Let me see if I got you. I was kind of thinking about in the company level framework, layer 1, layer 2 on the functional layer, what each of the functions can help to, and you completely change it much more to the new trend of squads and team of teams approaches, which is, so what are the 3 or 4 teams for the year that are important at the company layer? And then let's kind of create cross-functional teams to define KRs for the success of those 4 teams that become the objectives, right? And we will not have kind of the layer 2 at the functional layer, but layer 2 is much more team oriented. It depends on what is the team or the objective that we want to achieve for the year. That's kind of the process of cascading that you are proposing.
Yeah, I mean, think within the OKR framework, it's not defined that you should do it. You must do it this way, or you must do it that way.
Got it.
Having everything trickled top down, I think there's a lot of organizations that are looking into OKR that want to move away from that waterfall approach where everything is being dictated top down. So this is why I'm always recommending this other approach where, as the leadership of a business, you stick to like defining the longer term priorities for a specific year, the annual objectives for the company, and then leave it up to the teams to come up with their own suggestion, what they believe they should be, the OKRs that they should be working on as a team. And those can be inspired by the company objectives. Those can also be inspired by the strategy of the business, and they can also be inspired by the KPIs that they are responsible for, right? So to give you one example there, if our sales team has a KPI to make sure that the average deal size stays at a certain level.
Got it.
Now, when COVID happened last year, that immediately dropped because most of the new clients that we signed, they all went for the minimum package. When they are setting OKRs, then the question was like, hey, we do have this KPI that we are responsible for. And right now we are absolutely not meeting that. Is that something that we believe we should fix? Or do we put it aside and just always force ourselves to focus on these annual company objectives that we have? Well, in our case, we find it just as important for them to make sure that they maintain their KPIs. And if their KPIs are unhealthy, that they focus on fixing them. Then it is to make sure that they stay focused on the bigger themes that are important for the business as a whole for the year. In this case, we decided not to do anything with it because we knew it was caused by COVID, and we didn't want to implement processes that would force companies to buy more than they would otherwise, and let them face costs that they would rather avoid due to the crisis. So in this case, it wasn't acted upon.
Let's move into the number 3 as we are coming to the end of the show, which is the execution operating system. And this is much more related with the discipline, the communication, and iterative mindset. So not being fundamental that we've defined the OKRs, we need to follow with them until the end of the day. So until the end of the quarter. So we are learning new things, and maybe we find the KR that better measures success than the KR that we have defined in the beginning of the quarter. And that's fine to change it. But it's also important to have the rituals in place, to have those weeklies, monthlies, quarterlies, where we really reflect, and that we don't skip them, and that we don't make them boring and tedious. So what are some of your tips around the rituals and having iterative mindsets and discipline implementing OKRs?
I think my first tip would be that this is a part of your business that you will be constantly iterating and evaluating and changing, and the part of the business, I mean, then
and that's
the meetings and the rituals that you have. Yeah, that is fine. And it also, whatever works when you're 5 or 10 people, it doesn't work anymore when you're 30 people.
Perfect.
And also with things like all hands meetings, I think the more people are involved in a meeting, the more you automatically need to stay at a higher level, because the details won't be relevant for everyone anymore. That's simply impossible. And if you have an all hands meeting with 100 people, like, you don't want that to drag on for hours, where half of the time people are just bored or have no idea what's being talked about. So yeah, you'll constantly be changing that, and you constantly be iterating on that. And I think that's perfectly fine in the nature of running a healthy business. Then regarding the rituals itself, yeah, we're always testing many different things, also because we want to make sure that we can advise our own customers properly. So we're always testing different things. But what I think from all the different meetings that we've tried and all the things that we've tested, the one that I like most is the monthly all hands meeting. So at the beginning of every month, we come together and I give a company update. So in our case, we just pull up Perdoo, we look at the company KPIs, we look at the progress that we're making on the company objectives that we have. And then we go quickly around all the different teams, where the team leads then give an update on the performance of whatever their team is working on at that time. So again, also there, customer success comes up. We look at the customer success KPIs. These are the obvious things, of course, like how is churn developing? How is the customer satisfaction developing? Maybe we'll look at NPS, and then we go to sales. So, okay, how much have we closed in the past month? Well, how's the average deal size developing? How many customers did we get on board? We look at the sales OKR that they're working on. And that really doesn't take that much time. I think we spend around 5 to 10 minutes max per team. I think it's closer to 5 minutes. And then after that meeting, everybody's fully up to date again about what's going on in the business and how we're performing. And also for us in a leadership position, you're fully up to date, right? So you don't rely anymore on making sure that people are logging in and looking up that information themselves. We have that meeting. We know for sure that prior to that meeting, everything is verified, everything is up to date. So it's just a great moment to fall back to. And then every month we have that meeting, and then after that meeting, you're fully up to date again. And then for the rest of the month, people just can continue doing their own things. And then you see differences within teams. So some teams, they have a central team meeting every week. Other teams, they have one-on-ones with the manager, and there isn't really a team meeting. Mm-hmm. I think the dynamics in teams are very different. Our engineering team has a daily stand-up. I mean, that's something that's just completely not necessary. That's
fine again.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine for them. But with sales, with marketing, you don't need these things. It's at least from my point of view, you don't need it. So I think it's these rituals. The smaller the time frame that you're focusing on, I think the more you need to leave freedom to the different teams to define what works best for them. But then on company level, you should at least have, I think, depending on the size, like we're not talking about big corporates with thousands of employees. Of course, we're talking about startups with scale-ups. And I think for startups with scale-ups, it is important to have this monthly or at least a quarterly meeting where you all get together, quickly look at company performance. And then there's, of course, other things to discuss there as well.
Love it. Perfect. And we have 2 minutes to wrap up.
You're keeping good track of time. Thank you.
What advice would you offer to your younger self?
Yeah, I think so. Because we're talking about startups and scale-ups here, the advice that I would give to myself, to my younger self, I would say like 7 years ago when we first started with Perdoo, and it is the reason I'm mentioning it here is because I think this is maybe a mistake that other founders are making as well. But me and my co-founder are both extremely product focused. So we were so focused on making sure that we solve a real problem for organizations, making sure that everything works out. So whenever we had churn, we always felt really bad about that. And we wanted to get churn as low as possible. And we wanted to make sure that our close rate will be as high as possible and NPS will be really high. And while doing that, what we forgot is that there's a very important number that needs to work out for your business, which is customer lifetime value over your customer acquisition cost. And for us, the multiple there was like 15x, and I think it's still 10x. Whereas for organizations, it only needs to be 3x. So something that we have completely missed by being so product focused and by making sure that your product is perfect and then your clients are as happy as you can. We sort of overlooked that. Yeah, from an economic perspective, everything was working out more than fine already, and we should have started scaling the business faster than we did. That's how I feel about it now. And if I could help any other listener of this show prevent making that mistake, that will make me really happy.
Henrik, we are on time. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Thanks.
And to the community, we keep bringing you the best of the best. Today, Henrik van der Pol, CEO at Perdoo with you. And see you soon. And of course, keep scaling.